Welcome to the Dispense Magazine podcast, bringing you news and information about medical cannabis for patients and physicians. Whatever you and your doctor might talk about, that's what we talk about on this podcast. I'm your host, Sven Hosver. In this episode, we continue our discussion about what happens to the medical program once the recreational adult use of cannabis is legalized. We talked to Pennsylvania State Senator Shariff, author of SB 350, an adult use bill currently being debated in the state Senate. How will legalization affect the medical industry? Can current patients be assured that their medicine will still be available? Let's hear what Senator Street has to say. We're talking today with Senator Shariff Street. He is a Pennsylvania senator, and he has proposed Senate Bill 350, which is going to hopefully create a legalized adult use market here in Pennsylvania. And what we want to talk about today is how do we do that and protect our medical program and our medical laws as they are right now, and make sure that the patients keep getting the medicine that they're getting used to. Over 100,000 people now in Pennsylvania are getting medical care. Senator Street, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And let's start just with that. Give us the kind of a thumbnail sketch of your bill, and what are the most important aspects of it?
Well, my bill would legalize the adult use of cannabis without a medical oversight. This is important for a few reasons. One, it would there are a number of people who need to use could use cannabis both for recreational purposes, but also for treating ailments that are that don't require doctor supervision. For instance, inflammation of joints, stress, and other kinds of things that people would, if you think of, might take an over-the-counter drug for. Like, you don't have to get a doctor's note for a Tylenol or for a Halls, but they do treat minor medical issues. So cannabis can be used in that way. The bill creates a tiered system for people getting licenses. There would be a home grow component, there would be a micro grow component, and then there will be people who are growing at the full level grower processor level. And the micro grow folks, home grow would only be able to grow for personal use, and micro grow would be growing only to sell into a place that's testing, and the testing requirements will be lower for micro grow. And the idea is to allow people who are smaller business people lower barriers to entry. One of the interesting components is we do create for the large grower processor licenses, there would be the people we would grandfather in the folks who were currently in the medical program, so they've already participated. One important component is if you have a medical card, we do not tax in Pennsylvania medicine, so medical cannabis would remain untaxed, and there would probably be a fairly significant tax on the recreational cannabis. So from a consumer standpoint, there would still be an incentive for people who have doctor-assisted conditions to participate in the medical program, because it would be significantly cheaper for those people to participate. Long term, because I've got a separate bill from Senate Bill 350, which is the recreational adult use. I have a bill calling on some changes, the state to work in conjunction with the feds to make some changes, which would eventually allow the medical program to be paid for by people's insurance payments, which would, of course, create a more robust market for the medical product. So eventually, what I envision is you have a recreational market for adults that's operating in one way, and for your medical market, people who have doctor supervised medical conditions would have it prescribed, and they would be able to have that, would only have to pay a copay if there was one and not pay the full cost. And again, even if the full cost would be much cheaper because there wouldn't be any taxes. So that's how we separate it out.
That sounds like those are two really important ways that you would be helping to protect that medical market, is that the prices are going to be lower, and especially if you get insurance to pay for it. Is that your goal, to help maintain a strong medical program?
Absolutely. I want to maintain a medical program because, for medical program is important because it has It allows folks who are in the space where they might otherwise be prescribed opioids to be prescribed cannabis. Cannabinoids do not have the addictive principles that opioids have, and they can be used in many instances to treat pain in a much safer way, and particularly for long things like back nagging back pain and protracted types of pain management issues. If you were to use cannabinoids, you don't have you're not going to have to worry about addiction in the way that almost certainly there's a high level of risk of addiction for prolonged use of opioids in pain management.
So we're talking about the medical aspects. There's also a strong social justice component to adult use bill.
Absolutely.
You want to talk about that, the how to get people out of prison and get their lives back?
Yeah, so another component of the bill is this. Well, first, as a way of background, although a cannabis use amongst people across economic demographics, racial demographics is relatively constant. So wealthier people use cannabis at roughly the same level as poor people. Blacks, whites, Latinos all use cannabis at roughly the same level. The prosecution levels for poor people are much higher than wealthy people. And while there aren't statistics kept about poor people and wealthy people, we do have statistics that show that African Americans and Latinos, who have roughly the same use as white folks, are prosecuted 4 or 5 times more, or 4 or 5 more times more likely to be prosecuted. So legalizing it takes that away. There's a tremendous amount of savings that'll happen in our criminal justice system by not spending a lot of time, energy, and money incarcerating and prosecuting people for cannabis use. The final component is in the bill. We would clear retroactively any cannabis-related convictions and have those records sealed. And the reason we do it that way is we want it automatic, because otherwise it will be a pretty significant expense for people to have to go out and get their records cleaned up. Now, that doesn't mean if you had a multiple things and one of them was cannabis, your whole record is clean. It just clears up all the cannabis-related convictions, because we don't want the state to both be profiting, have a legalized industry, and have many people have their lives crippled and their ability to find gainful employment crippled because of a history of cannabis use.
Do you have anything in the bill that would help those people to be first in line to get into the industry, or have no barriers into the industry if they want to work?
We create low barriers of entry for everyone by having the micro grow program. And we believe that the micro grow program really has a social justice component, because it allows anyone who may not have the resources to come in at a higher level to come in, and also home grow for people who just want to use it for recreational. And there's some people that will invariably start out with home grow, and maybe their friends want or telling them, hey, this is a great thing, because they're just using it recreationally, and they might want to move to a micro grow level. But remember, the key component of micro grow: lower costs, lower barriers to entry, lower testing, but they're selling into the grower processor market where there's higher level testing before it goes to the general public. Another component is safe labeling. We know people are using cannabis currently, and they're using it only with buying it off the street, and people may think they know what they're buying, but they don't know the full gamut of what they're purchasing, because there's no labeling, there's no testing. This would allow testing and labeling so that we can clearly know what people are using.
There's a report that's going around on Facebook right now about fentanyl being found in some weed up in New York State, I guess. And of course, right away, all the people jump out and say this is just scare tactics by whatever the powers that be. Do you know, just as an aside, whether any of that is true, that there actually is fentanyl? And what you're saying is that this testing would actually help ensure that that is never the case.
So I don't know if it's true or not, but what I do know is cannabis isn't a gateway drug. But what happens is cannabis creates cannabis sellers in the black market are sometimes can be gateway marketers. Yeah. So what happens is if you get a person who is who is selling multiple different illegal products, one of which is cannabis. And of course, you do have your cannabis person who's just selling cannabis for all you folks out there who are just strictly cannabis. So I'm not trying to cast aspersions on everyone, but what I'm saying is, as a purchaser, you don't really know, and so that person may intentionally lace your cannabis with a more addictive substance in order to make more money off of you, because clearly a person who uses cannabis who doesn't have money might say, I'm just not going to smoke cannabis for a while. A person who's addicted to cocaine, methamphetamines, or heroin is going to show back up and do whatever it takes to continue to supply that habit. So because of the low level addictive properties of cannabis, it's the dealers who are trying to convert cannabis users to people who are going to be a more reliable profit stream. So what we have suggested is, if you move into a legal market, you eliminate that problem, and in so doing, severely cut down on the possibility for expansion for people's cannabis use, to then have dealers trick them unwittingly into using more serious drugs.
Let's talk about a couple of other aspects I think that are really important to both the recreational and the medicinal industry. Is what can be done about the banking situation, about how difficult it is for cannabis dispensaries and businesses to have bank accounts. I mean, I don't even touch the plant, and I've had 2 of my online accounting services shut down because I take money from people who touch the plant, as it were. What can we do about the banking situation?
So I have a resolution that addresses the banking issue. So you could create an intranet situation where you had a closed banking environment, but there are a lot of challenges to doing that. The more practical solution there are a number of steps that the Justice Department outlined during President Obama, when Holder was Attorney General. And if the federal government could go back to allowing banks or financial institutions who follow those principles to conduct banking, then we would be able to have states work with banks to move into a place where we could have a bank market, where the feds could just deschedule it from Schedule 1 to a more reasonable schedule. But assuming that even short of that, there are principles that the Justice Department that has outlined that would allow us with banking. We have a Senate resolution that calls upon the federal government to do that, and moreover calls upon Pennsylvania state government to work to become ready to assist banks in creating a more stable banking environment, so that cannabis sales can be conducted in a banked environment, and it's not all cash.
Yeah, that would I know that would help a lot to eliminate the black market as well. Let's talk about. I thought it was very interesting that the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association issued a public letter against legalization, and their argument is that it's hard enough to find good employees because so many people refuse to take the drug tests. And they argue that these tests are essential to the safety of hazardous jobs and things like that in the industry. Do they have a point? Is this going to make it harder for employers to find good employees, or what can be done about that whole situation?
Well, no, I mean, look, it's hard. It'll make it easier because right now we have we irrationally exclude people from employment because cannabis is considered an illegal use. Clearly, nobody should be on the job high, working in a safe industry. No one should be on the job drunk either. That doesn't mean we go back to the prohibition of alcohol, because we wouldn't want intoxicated people driving buses. We just don't want bus drivers to be intoxicated while they're driving. If a bus driver goes on vacation and indulges and becomes intoxicated while he's laying on the beach with his or her significant other, no one gets upset about that. Nor should we be concerned if a person is on vacation using cannabis when they return. The problem is we have to come up with appropriate standards for testing to determine when a person is in fact high or under the psychoactive effects of THC, as opposed to when a person merely had been exposed to cannabis within the last 30 days. So right now, the tests we use are so sensitive, they're only designed to determine whether a person has used cannabis at all in the last 30 days. And there's no distinction made between a person who's currently high and a person who used cannabis, say, 29 days ago. Clearly, no cannabis high lasts 30 days.
Not that I've tried anyway. Well, that is kind of, from what my research has shown, is one of the problems is that somebody with a high tolerance has a much different level of where they are actually intoxicated to the point of impairment over somebody who's a first-time user. And so it's difficult to come up with a standardized scale.
We draw a bright line like we did for alcohol. Not everybody is drunk at the same level, but everyone tests drunk at the same level. And we draw a bright line which would be fairly conservative. And we'd say, listen, if you have this much in your system, you are knocked out from participate. We believe you're under the influence, and therefore you cannot participate in any activities which require you to not be under the influence of intoxicating substances. We draw bright lines all the time. We do for drug alcohol levels. Obviously, if you have a 400-pound man and you have a 80-pound man, they're going to have different levels of tolerance in many cases. That doesn't mean that we don't still have the same bright line in terms of blood alcohol level.
This also was going to apply for the whole situation of DUIs.
Yeah, we need a whole new standards now, and we need that currently. We need that because technically a person in the medical cannabis program, there's an argument that person shouldn't be able to drive at all. But why would we stop a person who's using medicine, who may have used the medicine before he or she went to bed the night before to prevent epileptic seizures, clearly no longer under the psychoactive effects of cannabis? Why would we say that person shouldn't be able to drive a car? It's irrational. And it is a vestige of cannabis prohibition that we still have to clean up.
Well, one group that agrees with you is the Pittsburgh Firefighters Union. They recently negotiated a deal with the city of Pittsburgh that any firefighter that has an MMJ card can use medical cannabis medicinally. They present their card to the testing company, and the testing company, under HIPAA rules, cannot tell the city or any of the firefighters, the management, that they have a card, or they cannot get a positive test on their THC if they have THC in their system. Do you see this as a good model moving forward for unions on protecting their workers, or do you think all of this kind of issue would go away with an adult use bill?
Listen, I haven't looked at the particulars of the arrangement worked out with the Pittsburgh firefighters. But listen, the general sentiment of it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like the direction we need to move in now. And I think we can have some more formalized arrangements across industry that cut across industries going forward. But I'll tell you something, firefighters, and I know at least one personally who they suffer injuries sometimes, and particularly back injuries that can be ongoing. And the pain management associated with that has caused opioid addiction in firefighters. And so it makes perfect sense that the firefighters should be at the cutting edge. Our first responders who put themselves on the line need pain management that can be done without the worrying about opioid addiction. And so I think we should all be supporting what the firefighters are doing in Pittsburgh, and I commend them.
Absolutely. And they also suffer from PTSD at a far higher rate than the general population.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I was focusing on the physical injuries, but you're right. The mental health challenges are equally significant and important.
Yeah. Well, I like the things you said about protecting the medical industry. I deal directly with a lot of the dispensaries and listen to their concerns. And one of them is, well, if somebody can grow their own, well, why would they come in to buy it from me? And I kind of see that as, say, a bar owner saying, well, I'm worried about the home brew industry, taking away my beer customers. Do you see it about that same way?
Yeah, I do. I don't think that I think we're making a big, I think there will be some people for whom home grow is really important, and we should give those people that liberty. But I think that the vast and overwhelming majority of people will allow someone else to grow it, and they'll just purchase it. There's a good bit of work involved in that. And I don't think that I think there'll be plenty of people that don't mind buying, particularly in the medical space where the costs will be are even lower, and eventually be covered by insurance.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
moreover, the way that the product is used in medical is often used in oils and things that would be a little bit more complicated to produce at home than just growing the plant.
well, and many people don't realize that burning the plant actually destroys a lot of the terpenes, which provide most of the medical aspect, most of the medical relief. The ensemble effect is because of all these extra terpenes. You burn it, and a lot of those disappear. So you lose that aspect of it as well.
Absolutely.
I liked what you said too about how equating it with like over-the-counter medicine. There's some people that say that all use is medical use. You have an opinion on that?
Well, I don't know where that line is. I don't know what the line is between a person who uses a Halls, which is a cough drop, is using it because he or she is using that to relieve a sore throat, or because the person enjoys the sensation that a Halls makes on his or her throat, and that becomes recreational. And so I don't know that I need to know that, because there's no harm in that person using a Halls, and there's no harm in responsible adult use of cannabis.
Yeah. Well, everything that you're proposing makes perfect sense to those of us on the pro side. What kind of pushback are you getting? Who's pushing back, and how hard? And do they,
Well, look, I mean, there are some members that are concerned. Clearly, Senator Corman in Pennsylvania, he's in Republican leadership. He has concerns. But there are many more members who believe the question is not whether we will move towards recreational cannabis, but when. And many of those members just want to make sure we do it right in a responsible way. They ask questions about how we're going to address the issues for responsible testing to know what levels are intoxication, how we're going to deal with the banking challenges. And so what I find is I'm peppered more with logistical questions from colleagues than questions about morality from colleagues. I think most colleagues recognize this makes sense. The last thing I'll point out is, although we haven't focused on it here, there is hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that we'll be able to generate through cannabis legalization to take care of things like our schools, our infrastructure, and even things like property taxes. The bill directs specifically towards schools, which is a way of addressing both property taxes and the education of our young people. So I think there are, for those reasons and many more, most of my colleagues are inclined to believe that cannabis is something we're going to do, and the question is when and how.
that's really encouraging to hear that we're asking more about how do we do this, not whether we do this.
Right.
Is there any other things you can think of to do, or how can we continue to end this stigma and this kind of reefer madness mentality that's out there?
Well, look, I think there's a measure of education as people become more aware and engaged in what's going on. I think we're much more likely to get greater social acceptance. Two, I think we need to have discussions like the one we're having now. We talk about it. And three, we need to, some of it are things that we kind of know intuitively, but we need to just acknowledge. One, for instance, the ridiculous notion that cannabis it would be a Schedule I drug and therefore more serious than cocaine, right? That's absurd. Nobody believes that, but the fact of the matter is federal law still lists cannabis as a Schedule I and does believe that there are some uses for various kinds of opioids, which are much more serious, and even various types of narcotics. So, and cocaine-based products. So we have to look at it and say that's ridiculous. And I think as we call out the ridiculous nature of some of this, that will help. The other thing is people who are medical cannabis users, like some of my colleagues in General Assembly, those folks need to acknowledge that that's what's going on. And then I think third, we need to make it clear that there's a difference between a person who's a responsible, legal, recreational cannabis user and a person who's going into an alley to buy an unregulated product. And the reality is that people are forced in the alleys to buy unregulated products because of an overbroad and outdated law around cannabis.
Yeah, well said. Any last thoughts on this entire subject that we've been talking about here, the recreational and the
So I do want to point out that from September 27th and to September 27th and 28th, we're having a Cannabis Opportunities Conference in conjunction with at Temple Medical Education, Medical School, at 3500 North Broad in Philadelphia, in conjunction with DACO, which is it's the Diasporic Alliance of Cannabis Opportunities. And I think if people can come out to that and we get show a real robust level of participation in the conference, that will help, and people can share their ideas and thoughts, because there's none of us have cornered the market on good ideas. And additionally, I want to applaud the governor and lieutenant governor for their openness in Pennsylvania for this, and the great responses that we've gotten at most of the stops on the lieutenant governor's listening tour around cannabis legalization.
Well, Senator Street, I really appreciate your talking with us today, and I applaud all of your efforts. It sounds like you're fighting a good fight.
Thank you as well.
That concludes this episode of the Dispense Magazine podcast. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Pennsylvania State Senator Shariff Street, author of the adult use bill currently being debated. Join us again on another podcast soon. You can find all of our podcasts on the homepage at dispensemagazine.com. I'm Sven Hosford. Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Mindful Medicine, LLC.